Because I'm doing better at it. I feel like I'm getting better at it.
So like I don't want to offer one for the third. So like it,
Imagine you got on the first one though, that one.
Yeah, how would you
get on the first point?
how would you get them?
Sometimes if it's like just a
Really good song.
No, I'm gonna call the 11th meeting to order.
Do we have a projector?
Nope. I sent everything to you via email, so you can pull those up. Okay. Senator Flores.
Here.
Senator Rodriguez.
Here.
Senator Hayashi. Senator Max Robbins.
Here.
Senator Newlander.
Here.
Senator Jenkins. Senator Jacobs. Senator Ossip.
Here.
Senator Adams.
Here.
Senator Abisakara.
Here by Fox.
Last name.
Bell.
Senator Perez. Senator Sellinger.
Here.
Senator Zitzman. Senator Tercios. Senator Menashe. Senator Giesler. Senator Butler. Senator Luthra.
Here by Fox.
Last name. Senator Jacob Robbins.
Present.
Quorum is met. We shall proceed. As you can see, there are issues with the projector, so I sent everything to you via email. Is there any current discussion on the agenda?
I have some.
Yes.
At the end of new business, I'd like to add first the election of a chair for the finance committee, and then after that, the election of a member of the finance committee, pending whether the chair who is elected is currently a member.
I second.
I also second. Well, thanks.
Okay. Is that something this body wants to do, given the amount of senators currently present?
No, well, we're gonna have to start a budget soon. And I think at least the person who wants to be chair is here. So, in my opinion, and I would also add that the most important job of the finance committee is just to show up, and it's reflected if people don't.
We got another senator come to the house.
Yeah, read.
Yes is no.
Okay, further discussion on the agenda? Seeing none will be adopted without objection. Moving to adoption of the minutes from the 10th meeting. Any discussion on the 10th meeting minutes? Seeing none, they'll be adopted without objection. Moving to public comment. Any member of the public wishing to speak at this time?
Yeah, you said in the agenda.
Yes. What is your email?
A Weinstein, AWEINSTEIN @theeagleonline.com.
No. Any other member of the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, we shall move on to reports from officers. First from Case Director Hawk.
Okay, thank you very much, Trevor. Hope everyone's having a good afternoon so far and is enjoying the AUSG election season. So does the projector not work?
Nope.
Okay. Did you send them my presentation?
They all have your presentation.
Okay, yeah. So hopefully you can see that. Yeah.
I do like
The cherry blossoms.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do that, and we can project.
Yeah. I know, it's beautiful. All right, so I'm gonna keep this brief. So basically, the first thing I want to talk about was tomorrow, Case is hosting an event with the SPA Leadership Program in the Bridge from 6 to 8 p.m. AUPD is gonna be there, some of their officers, and we're basically going to sort of address some of the major concerns that students have had over the years with AUPD. Also, I'll be giving a presentation sort of on the key student rights and how they relate to when you interact with officers. You know, when can an officer ask you for your ID, what's your responsibility when they do that, that sort of stuff. So that's tomorrow. So if you can be there again, it's in the Bridge, 6 to 8 p.m. If you can go, that would be great. Yeah.
Do you have to go to the whole thing?
No, I mean, you can like drop by for however long you're available. Probably fine. And then some other updates. So I'm trying to remember what I put on the slides.
Here, you can look at that.
Yes. Okay. So on Thursday, there's going to be Case is also hosting another thing. It's with the AU's conduct office that manages like student conduct code and conduct resolution, all of that. We're hosting an open forum to discuss some of the changes that we've been working on. They wanted like mainly like any student leaders on campus who are interested in sort of the policy changes to be present if you're available. It's in NGC 245 starting at 1 p.m. again on Thursday. So if you can be there, that would be great. I know a lot of people from Case are going to be there just to give our feedback before we like finalize the changes to the code. The student rights cards. So I spent like 2 weeks, like literally 2 straight weeks of meeting with all the building managers and all of the like academic deans, and I finally convinced everyone to allow us to put the student rights cards up. So I'm going to start doing that this week, and I will also post an online version this week as well once we get that process started. So you'll start seeing those around campus, hopefully. There's also I want to talk about the legislation. I know I brought this up the last time I was here. Legislation regarding Case managing the student rights cards like from here on out, as well as like training for Case advocates. So I just want to thank Senator Flores for helping write the legislation. And it's probably going to end up being, I don't know if this is on the agenda for this week, but I know Bobby has put together like policy books. So Case is going to have its own policy book, and the legislative provisions are going to go into that. So that is good, and it's going to be institutionalized. The last 2 things were, one, the annotated student conduct code. I sent it to Secretary Bailey, Alex Bailey, and he is working on getting that up on the website. So when he does that, I'm going to follow up with him today. But when he does that, I'll like post it on social media as well, just so everyone's aware. And then lastly, I met with him a couple of days ago, and we decided to make some changes to the Case website. So one, for any of you who remember, Case used to have its own website called Case Connect. So that is now no longer operational because we finally like shifted all of the elements and information to the AUSG website. So that is the last thing. And yeah, I'll take any questions, and yeah, that's it.
Questions for the director, Piper?
How do you think you were able to change their minds on the student rights cards? Because that, took so long.
Yeah, I think it was 2 things. Number one was I had to convince the like Dr. Ah, the VP of Campus Life, to let Case play a more active role, because prior to like a couple of weeks ago when I convinced her to let us do that, it was like OCL was handling everything, and we were just like getting information like in a very second-hand manner. So they would talk with the building managers and then relay the information to us, and I was like, the system doesn't make sense. Why can't I just talk to them? So I convinced her to let us to do that. And the second part of it was just like being persistent. So I literally arranged meetings, and again for like 2 straight weeks, met with like every single person and just told them that this is a good idea. And a lot of them were receptive because it's just like a sensible, like common sense thing to do. So yeah, I think that was it. And again, it'll start this week, so I'm very thankful for that.
Other questions? Matt?
Aside from just the difficulty with like getting in touch with them in the first place, like having that communication, I remember a while ago when you were first updating us, you mentioned that like the people I think you mentioned like Kurt, maybe like the building manager was like just like flat out no, and maybe SOT and like McKinney as well. Like, why are people so close to this at first?
Yeah, so I don't know if it was Hearst. I think it may have actually been Kogod. I think the reason was, again, there was like, we weren't in the room to convince them. And so I think, obviously, like, I don't know what information OCL gave them about student rights cards. Like, it may have just been an email saying, students want to put this up, can you look at it, and a flat rejection. But once I was in the room, I just explained to them, why this is important. I explained to them that this doesn't, I know there was potential concern about the aesthetics of the buildings. I explained that that's not really a valid concern either. So yeah, I mean, OCL never really told me why, like what their initial hesitation was, but once I met with them and explained it, they like sort of understood, and again, they were very like receptive to it. So I think that was probably the missing component.
Other questions?
Curtis?
Thank you, sir, for your work on the student rights cards, and I was just wondering, will they be posted in the residence halls also, or is that subject to a different?
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, I know the initial goal was to literally have student rights cards in every single dorm, just like you have that sort of like fire safety thing in your dorm room. That, however, is going to have to be a longer discussion because the building managers and deans I met with do not have jurisdiction over the residence halls. That is something that because we do have like a surplus of the cards, so I do want to eventually do that. It's just going to take, I don't know if I can do that by the end of the semester, but it's certainly something that I've been wanting to do.
Yeah, just because OCL oversees the housing and residence life office, so I thought maybe Dr. Al or someone in the office of campus life would have directed the student rights cards to both someone in HRL and also the building.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. But again, like from my understanding, they only OCL had only reached out to the academic units. But I mean, yeah, I'm more than willing to try and do that this semester. If not, then certainly I think, within a couple of months, it's something that could be done based on how this went once Case had full control of the situation.
Just a quick follow-up, would you be willing to work with the Residence Hall Association just to make sure that, AUSG and RJ both on the same page, because RJ may have more influence and power over putting the student rights cards?
Yeah, and actually, I think a good idea. And like, first of all, I'll note that like on the student rights cards, RHA's logo is on there because they helped provide some of the information. But the other thing is, I think a good starting point for putting these in the dorm rooms would be to like have RHA maybe like draft a resolution of support, because I know you all do have a lot of influence in those areas where ESG doesn't. So.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Moving to Comptroller Gladden.
Oh, do we have my?
Yeah, they have your report.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and present. Just wanted to update you all on transactions that have been spent since the last time I presented, which is what I've highlighted on slide 3 for co-sponsorship. So Lasso, they reached out for their Noche Latina that's coming up. So I gave them $500 for that. And the Community Service Coalition, this came out of the President's Cabinet for an event that Valentin is having. And so she just spent money from that. And so there's $250 in that account. And then I know recently Alex, he did update the website, which did cost $2,000. Other than that, if we go to KPU, for Wonk of the Year, I'm still in communication with Yaz to kind of figure out how much was spent for that, which is why it's not posted on this slide. So as soon as I get that, I'll update everything. And then for sub, the same thing for them. Recently, Smino, the rapper, came to campus to perform, and I don't know how much that transaction costs as well. It's mainly because, like, for the programmers, their sheets are not updated, so I can't see that information that they have. So I'm in communication with them to figure out how much the speaker and this rapper costs. But as soon as I get that information, I could report back to you all. But overall, for WI, nothing has changed so far. And then I just have a summary on the last slide for the total amounts from the accounts right now. So if you have any questions, then let me know or ask some questions now.
Piper.
I'm just wondering, when you're like, you had to confirm that you're gonna give money to a certain club or something, like, what kind of considerations do you take in about whether you're gonna give them that money or how much?
Right. So I have a Google form which I send out to whoever reaches out to me, and then after they fill in all of like the necessary information, I'll like go in and check it, and then I'll approve it that way. And it's like a good checks and balance way to figure out like if AUCC or any other organization gave them money to. So yeah. Mhm.
Other questions? Max?
On that form, so does it say whether, like, finding out if like AUCC or what the RHA or any other money bodies gave them money? Is there a question that goes, because I know there's like amount requested, the amount that they're actually going to be needing. Is a question, have you asked other people for money?
Yes, that's a question on the form as well. Mhm.
Excuse me.
And then they're also required to send a breakdown of like what their costs are going towards. And then if I do deny them, then like I'm asking them for a plan of how they're going to raise money to figure out how they're going to fund their event too. So yeah. Good question.
Curtis?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering, when we're going into the BAC, when we're allocating money to organizations within AUSG, such as the Women's Initiative, that still has $16,000 left in their current balance. I was just wondering, what is your suggestion going into the next BAC process?
Right. So for the next process, I think it's obviously important to see how much money is left towards the end of the year, and then to see which specific departments would need money the most to allocate for the following year. So let me see, like, for example, like, I don't know, like, I feel like funding for clubs this year isn't really like as popular right now. It's just something I'm noticing, even though like we, like for SG General, like we get $5,000, there's about $2,000 left right now. And I'm pretty sure that'll pick up like as we get closer towards the end of the year and the weather gets warm and everyone wants to have an event, especially outside. But I think it's just really important just to look at like where we are, like once we get to that stage, and see how we can move money around so that things can get spent more efficiently. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Also, I have to head out because we have our meeting.
All right, moving to Judicial Board Associate Ellis.
I'm here on behalf of Brian. He could not make it today, so I'm just going to read the opinions. And unfortunately, if you do have any questions at the end, I would just allow you to redirect it to him because he'll probably be able to answer them better than I can. So here's the response. On March 20th, 2019, the chair of the Judicial Board received an advisory inquiry from Bobby Zitzman, Senator of the chair of 2019. The inquiry related to a hypothetical situation in which during the election season, the option for none of these candidates was the winner of an election. There were two parts of the inquiry. A question whether the Election Commission Policy Board has the authority to decertify an election simply on the basis of the situation in which none of these candidates were the winner. The second inquiry related to whether or not the option of none of these candidates impacted the results of a race except to qualify or disqualify write-in candidates. With regards to the first question of decertification, the chair agrees with the inquirer that it would be a violation of the governing documents and the election policy book for either the Election Commission Policy Board or the Undergraduate Senate to decertify an election simply based on the situation in which none of these candidates gains the most votes. This is because the only way the Policy Board or the Senate could know to do this would be for the result of the election to be known before the certification process was complete. A clear violation of election rules. Therefore, there is no grounds for decertification simply on the basis of the aforementioned situation. The second question regarding the influence of the opinion of none of these candidates in the election. The Constitution is clear that, specifically for Senate races, those receiving the most votes in each constituency shall be considered elected and assume a seat in the undergraduate Senate. This makes it clear that those receiving the most votes shall assume seats, making no mention of the situation in which this would not apply. However, the none of these candidates option plays a more significant role in other elections than the Inquirer argued. Because the none of these options counted toward the vote totals, then there is a logical conclusion that it is to be counted as an option, just as any other candidate. Therefore, should the option be the winner in a race, none of the candidates, including the one with the most votes, would be seated, and the position would be considered vacant. Although according to the Constitution, special elections are only required for vacancies in the presidency and the vice presidency. Therefore, in any circumstance involving those offices, whereas none of these candidate option wins, the election commissioner would be required to hold a special election in the type and manner prescribed in the governing documents. As for any other race other than the presidency and vice presidency or the undergraduate Senate, the office will be temporarily assumed and eventually filled in the manner prescribed in the governing documents. Regarding the second question in special elections, the Inquirer did reference the election system in the state of Nevada, in which they too use a none of these candidates option. But if that option were to win, then the next highest vote getting candidate would assume the office. While this option may seem more convenient, there's nothing officially established in the governing document that would support such a system. In accordance with the Judicial Register, this opinion may not be appealed. Parties may seek a binding decision regarding the matter. It is so ordered on March 22nd, 2019. So, if you do have any questions, I would definitely refer you to Brian, as he could probably be more concise in his responses. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see. So a few things. One, the legislative agenda is finally done. So I'm hoping to get it publicly distributed tomorrow. We have a few social media things and press releases sort of prepared to announce it. I sent it out to the leadership and got back some minor responses in terms of things that needed to be edited to make sure that it was fine-tuned. So we should be all set there. And so when that goes out, it would be great to also have senators share it. And then you can also add any additional comments you want to make. Be like, hey, we're also doing these things, or this is what we have been doing, and here's some more stuff. And you can also redirect people to the website or to myself if they have more questions about that specifically. And then, yeah, Danya? 48 hours ago. So yeah. We'll have a special meeting on Wednesday because we need to certify elections. That will be from 6 to 8. The room is still to be determined. I will not be here because I will be down in Atlanta touring Emory. So Senator Zitzman will be. Oh, okay. I haven't committed yet. This is just the tour, but yes.
You got it.
Yeah.
You get the chance to tour.
Yeah. So yeah, Senator Zitzman will be taking over for that meeting. There isn't much that I can say about it right now, but basically, a special meeting can only consider what is the topic of the meeting, which is the certification of the elections. Bobby will run the body through everything, the specific procedure, but basically you'll just be determining if there were any problems with the elections and if those races need to be decertified or not, which usually there aren't that many problems, so you shouldn't run into any issues. But if that happens, Bobby will guide you through that. And then we were supposed to have a confirmation today, but the nominee is, she's out of town, and so she'll be here next week. And I'm hoping to have campus at large seat nominations as well for next Sunday, to get a few other senators in here. And I think that's really it. Let's see, we only have a couple weeks left, so I'm kind of just focusing on making sure that everything's up to date. Everyone knows what they need to be doing. I'm working on also transition documents and things like that, and preparing for the budget process. So that will, I think, I was talking to Anna last week about it, and back should be meeting sometime like mid-April. We're just waiting for numbers finalization, so be prepared for that. And the course of April will also be a lot of working with the executives-elect and all the new confirmations for their cabinets for the next year. So be prepared for those meetings as well. That's all I have right now. Piper?
On Wednesday at 6, we have that thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bobby.
Yeah, about that special meeting on Wednesday, isn't it true that if people didn't show up and we didn't have quorum, it would be a massive headache?
Yes.
Okay. Just everybody.
Yeah. But that's okay. But here's the thing, though, because I warned everyone. I gave a month advance notice for this meeting, so there should not be issues with attending this week.
Or some proxy.
Yeah, at least send a proxy. Jacob?
So I think what I hear Senator Zitzman saying is that everybody who's in this room, minus the proxies, you should know to be there this Wednesday, or send a proxy, because failure to certify the results on time would be not a great message to the student body. If people want to know who won, I'd like to know who won.
Yeah.
You want to win? Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions for me? Okay, cool. All right, moving to reports from committees. CRP did not meet, so I actually forgot to remove that one. So now we'll move to the Commission on Revising Bylaws.
There's a nice orange slideshow for everybody to watch. And there's a lot of information on there, so I would suggest that everybody have it handy while I'm going through it. So we had our commission to revise the bylaws, and it has been working over the past few weeks to do that. And it finished its work, and now it has a new draft of the bylaws that is before the Senate today, and a policy book as well. So in this presentation, I will be going over what the work the commission did and the product that we came up with. So if you look on the second slide, you'll see the people who are on the commission. We had 4 main groups of people from the Senate. We had me, Annalisa, Danya, and Sean. And from the president's office, we had Val and Saram and Giselle from the comptroller's office. And then programmers, we had Yaz, who's the KPU director, and Lisa, who is the sub-director. And then those were all the people who were on the commission and voted on the final product. And everybody approved the proposal that you have before you today. And then aside from them, we also talked to Trevor. He was at our meeting, and he was a non-voting member of the commission. And Mulan, the same, he was at the meeting as well. And I briefly talked with Alex just to get his perspective on a matter that had to do with the secretary's duties. So that's everybody who was involved with a good cross-section of the organization. So when we met in person, we went over problems that everyone had from their perspective with the bylaws so that we could target our efforts to address them. And that's those problems that we identified are on the third slide. First, just in general about the bylaws overall, a problem is that the rules that are set out in the governing documents don't reflect the practice, how things actually work out, either because, something changed that was out of the hands of the people who were supposed to be following those rules, or, the Senate made a bad rule, or it could have changed with the course of time. But for a lot of reasons, the rules didn't reflect the practice. And related to that is that problems in the governing documents, when they do arise, are slow to be solved because they have to be identified by someone in the Senate, and then that person has to do the work of writing something to correct them, and then that has to go through the legislative process. And another point under that same umbrella of the nature of the governing documents and how they change is that the Senate is in charge of maintaining all of these governing documents, like 7 or 8 of them, that regulate everything in the organization. But most of the people in the Senate don't really know anything about what the other parts of the organization do. So we've entrusted all of the rule-making responsibility of the organization to people who don't know how the rules should be applied. And I think that's not the fault of anyone in the Senate that they haven't done in these other parts of the organization, but that was just a flaw that was there. Next, the kind of minimal description of specific procedures and operations in the governing documents made it hard for there to be a transition of procedure from person to person. The programmers made this point that there's not really anything written out that's expected for them to do. So from person to person, those expectations of what they're supposed to be doing can change a lot. And that's seen with other parts of the organization as well, not just the programmers. Yeah, and the second point, I kind of touched on it already, that there's not really any specific expectations for the programmers that are written out. That's something that they brought up, as well as the fact that there are no experience qualifications for the vice president, and that can be a problem because the vice president is in charge of a ton of programming that requires very specific knowledge, and there's no way to ensure in the election process that the person who is elected has that background information that would be necessary for them to carry that out. Specific duties of the comptroller, just clarifying those things, and that kind of folds into the rest of the problems. I won't go too far into that. The Senate really only works in the spring semester because you're elected halfway through the fall, and then you don't do anything in the fall semester. So that's a problem that only one semester the Senate is working, and not in the summer and not in the fall. So that's no good. There's a lack of accountability for Senate members. People can just not do anything, and that impairs the organization. And lastly, I think there's a lot of just language and practices in the governing documents that make us look like we're pretending to be a real government, and that always bothered me. So I made sure to go through and take those all out. So those are all the problems we identified. They came from all the different people in this commission identified those at our meeting. So it was a really broad-based effort, and that's good. So based on those specific problems that we identified, on the fourth slide, you can look, and we have 6 major areas of reform that we went through and changed things in this new draft of the bylaws that you have before you today. So the first big structural change is that instead of having this hierarchy of government documents like we have now, with most of it concentrated in the bylaws, instead we're going to delegate most of the rulemaking authority to a series of policy books that deal with specific topics, and we can talk more about that later. There's a slide dedicated to that where that's explained more in detail. And in addition to creating those policy books, we took out language in the bylaws that would be better placed in those policy books so they can be placed there. Third, we added an experience qualification for the vice president. There are a number of structural changes to the Senate to improve effectiveness there. Remove this unnecessarily pompous language that I talked about. And as part of the change in governing documents and the addition of these policy books, we removed the student government code. And I'll talk more about that later as well. So on the 5th slide, you can see just in general that this process of all these changes reduced the size of the bylaws by a lot, where they were previously almost 16,000 words. Now they're a little bit over 10,000. I think that's good. It makes them more efficient and accessible. That's good. The 6th slide, you can see an overview of the articles, Article 1, 2, 3, and so on, and the old bylaws and the new bylaws, and you can look at that yourself. I won't go through every single one. So The seventh slide shows you the first bit of information you need to know to understand this new policy book structure that we're going for through this reform. This, on the seventh slide, this diagram shows how the governing documents are situated right now, where you have the Constitution and the bylaws and these things that come off of the bylaws, the Student Government Code, Election Policy Book, Judicial Register, and then all these ones underneath that are all entrusted with the Senate to write them, and they all kind of regulate everything except for a couple of them that are given specific functions. And this doesn't really make any sense. Like, why would something be in the bylaws versus the Student Government Code? There's not really a clear delineation of what is the purpose for all of them. And again, we run into the problem where if the Senate is writing all of them and the Senate doesn't know how these things operate, that can create problems of bad rules, rules that are just not realistic or will change over the course of time and not be updated, and all the problems I talked about earlier. So instead of that, on the 8th slide, what we're proposing is having this system of policy books instead, where you have the Constitution and the bylaws still, and those are still the same way where the Senate writes them and gets them ratified in the normal fashion. And then under that, under the bylaws, every specific area of student government, or at least the ones that we identified in this project, will have its own policy book, where the people who administer that policy write the policy books and the rules for that, and then get Senate approval of those policy books to make sure that there's still that oversight function. So in this chart here, I listed out what most of these policy books are that we're going for in this proposal. We already have the elections policy book from the Judicial Register. Those already exist. And those were actually the model that I used for how these policy books should operate. Those are written by the people who administer the policy. The election policy book is by the Elections Commissioner. The Judicial Register is by the J-Board Chair, and they get Senate approval for that. And then we also have a finance book for all their duties of comptroller and administering finances, and a budget policy book, which you all have in your inboxes today, a draft of that describes how the budget was created. A programming policy book for all the Vice President's cabinet, a case policy book, that's what I mentioned earlier, a communication policy book. The rules of debate and quorum, we already have that, which is the rules of Senate procedure. So those are all on the same level, and all of them, who's ever in charge of that area, like the programming policy book, for instance, the Vice President would write that and have it submitted to the Senate for approval. And then whenever they want to change anything about how that policy book operates, they can submit an amendment to the Senate to be approved. And if you want to know specifically how that operates in the new bylaws, you can look in the new bylaws, draft of which you all have in your inbox, and read specifically how that is to operate. Yeah, so that's all explained on the 9th slide, so we can skip that. That's what I just said. The benefit of the policy books, I think, is that it addresses the fact that the Senate doesn't really know anything about how all these other branches of the organization work. So it allows rules to be made by people who understand how they work, and hopefully that will create a system where people actually follow the rules because they reflect what can actually be done. And it makes it faster to update the policy books. And it allows for more specific and realistic restrictions and specifications of what people's expectations are. So now the next reform we did, as you can see on slide number 11, is the VP experience requirement. This was really simple. All we did was add into the subsection of the bylaws that used to say all the executives need 45 credits in order to run. They still say that. And then we added specifically for the vice president that you need to either have 1 year of experience in one of the SG programming boards, KU, Sub, Women's Initiative, or Founders, or equivalent experience in programming as certified by student activities. So we want this program experience, but we don't want it to necessarily be limited to student government because we want people from outside the organization to be able to run for positions as well. The next area of reform is Senate changes. So again, you can look at the draft bylaws that you've all been sent. I also have a bullet point document that indexes all the specific changes. You can look at that. But just really quickly, on this slide, you can see we added an explicit purpose, like what is the mission of the Undergraduate Senate. We changed the term, so now you're elected at the same time, but the term goes from January to January. So you have 2 full semesters to work, and that will hopefully get people to come stay more in the fall semester, because right now you only have like a month when you come back in the fall, and people just don't use that time, and then the new Senate comes, but they don't have time to do anything in the fall, and it just eliminates the whole semester. So instead, once you're elected in October, you have this period where you're a senator-elect and you can go to the meetings, but the old Senate is still finishing out their term. So I think that will create for a more efficient use of our time. We made permanent the committee structure that is currently in place and has been in place under different names as far back as you can look on the records. There's always these 3 standing committees that have these same purposes. So I think if we make them permanent, since they're always like that in the first place, and not leave it up to the discretion of the speaker every year, that can allow for future planning. Like if you want the Committee on Student Rights and Services to have some project that lasts from year to year, you can now do that where previously you couldn't because it wasn't clear whether that committee would exist next year. And we added a few new features for the orientation for new members. And again, you can look at the index of changes or the draft itself to see what those changes are. And then lastly, about all this pretending to be a real government. So we either eliminated or changed the names of a bunch of things. There's no more oath of office in this new bylaws. I think that's the stupidest thing that we do, to have everyone in the organization swear an oath. There's no need for that. We changed the name of the state of student government, like we're pretending that it's the State of the Union, to a progress update, which is what Val called it this year. We changed impeachment to removal, and we made optional at the discretion of the speaker the positions of Dean of the Senate, Historian, Clerk, all these things that real Congresses have that we don't need necessarily. They are not mandatory anymore. So the Student Government Code got eliminated in this new policy book thing because there was nothing that was good in the Student Government Code, and it didn't really make sense, again, for why something would be in the bylaws instead of the Student Government Code or vice versa. And that was something that we instituted last year, and it was good for that time, but now I think this is better, and we can talk more about that later. All right, so those are all the changes we made. And then one thing that we did not change, but was brought up by Brian, who's the J Board chair, that was in the bylaws, or the old bylaws, and now is in the new bylaws, something that he's concerned about, that I thought I would share his concerns with all of you, is that the Senate, in the old bylaws and these new bylaws, is given the authority to overturn J Board decisions, and he thinks that's bad because it undermines the authority of the judicial board. So I'll put that all to you guys, whether you think that's a good idea or not. But I'll just provide the background for why that is there. And basically what happened 2 years ago, before these provisions were added, is that during an election, the chair of the judicial board tried to prevent the election from being certified because he was dissatisfied with the result of it. And he also tried to remove the speaker and the president from office, which the J Board had the authority to do at that time, because they were trying to make sure that he didn't tamper with these elections. So after that, the guy who was speaker then and was later J Board chair, named Noah, he worked with the Senate to add into the bylaws, and then as J Board chair, he himself added into the judicial register that the Senate could check the J Board in that fashion. So that's the background for why that's there. So that's all the things that have changed in this new proposal. Now on the 16th slide, you can see I posed the question of whether we should waive first reading. And I think normally that's a bad idea. I voted every time there's been a motion to waive first reading on something against it on the basis of 3 reasons. But as you can see on slide number 16, I think in this case, all those 3 reasons indicate that we should waive first reading on this. The first problem I normally have with waiving first reading is time constraints. Like there's usually no reason that we need to have something done today as opposed to next week. But in this case, the commission had it as its goal in time to have these new rules in place before the new executive board is elected. Next time the Senate meets next Sunday to consider legislation, there will be a new executive board. So it would be nice if we could have these in place for transition and not have it up in the air while the people are after they've been elected. The second is the potential for review. I normally say, it's good to have a second set of eyes look at legislation to see whether it's a good idea. But in this case, we had a really good set of people on this commission working on it, 7 or 8 of them who are, from every part of the organization. And 4 of them, all the people who are representing the Senate, are also on CRP, which is the Senate committee that would be looking at this bill anyway. So considering that all those people have approved it, I think that is sufficient review, in my opinion. And then the third is that motions to waive first reading, I normally object to them because we already have all sorts of other things on the agenda when they're made. but today we have a pretty light agenda. Now, I know I did not anticipate that when I wrote this slide that there would be a bouncy castle out on the quad, but I would just ask everyone to summon all of your maturity to sit through this meeting, and remember that you had to ask dozens of people for their permission to represent them at these meetings every week, so you signed up for this, even if there's a bouncy castle outside. So, take your questions now, and I would note before I do that one of the objections to the policy book proposal is that when somebody stands up here and sounds like they know what they're talking about, the Senate will just go along with everything without any consideration. So I would really urge everyone to ask questions and prove those people wrong.
Jacob?
Thank you, Bobby, and everybody who worked on this. I think this is excellent. This is something that's been long overdue. I guess my question that I have relates to the VP experience requirement.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit hesitant on that specific addition, only because we don't have requirements for the president. I understand that the VP is uniquely in charge of programming and class council and things like that, but I guess my concern is that is the natural step after this to add more barriers of entry to people for other elected, like other e-board positions and things like that. Like, can you talk a little bit more about why this kind of thing was put in, like specifically for programming? I mean, like, just my concern is that there'll be other requirements that are put. So can you speak to like the uniqueness of this position?
Yeah, so we already have the 45 credit requirement for all the executives, but I think that the vice president is in a different category than the rest of the executives because of the level of specific like technical knowledge that is required for successful programming, or at least for the vice president to play an important role in that. They could delegate everything to their cabinet directors who hopefully have programming experience as well, because if they both don't, the director and the vice president, then it's a whole mess. But I think when you compare that to the president and the comptroller and the secretary, there's not the same kind of specific technical knowledge that is needed for those positions. So that's why I think we have an experience program for experience requirement for the vice president and not the other ones.
Can I just ask a follow-up? I mean, I understand that, but couldn't you also make the argument that since the vice president is an elected position, that someone could run on their experience or their lack of experience, and if the voters decide that's something that they want to endorse, that gives them a chance? Like, does a specific requirement have to be in place when it's already an elected position?
Yeah, I think that, you can have the question of whether we want any requirements at all, or we just want to leave it up to the voters purely, entirely. But I think we've already settled that debate when we established the credit requirement. And I know that's something that you were trying to get rid of last year, but I think we can all agree that there should be some requirements for executives in general. And once we establish that there should be some requirements for these positions, then once we're under that context, it's just a question of what requirements are a good idea. And I think this is a good idea, where we're leaving it open to anyone who has worked in any student organization as broad as we can possibly be, as long as they have some kind of programming experience.
Danya?
Can I piggyback off of that, because I was at the meeting. So I was at the meeting when we discussed this, and we did bring up some of those concerns in the meeting, in the bylaws meeting, about whether it would be bad to add a requirement because it might limit some people from being able to join. But both the sub and the KQ director were there, and they kind of expressed similar things to what Bobby is saying, as in that having a requirement would be helpful, but no one really knew what was the best way
Is this a
to put it
question?
in without it having, without it like kind of limiting some people. But like this, like as long as you have programming experience.
Is this a question?
No, but.
Just asking if I understand.
Do you understand?
I understand. I understand.
Annalisa?
So I would argue that this is detrimental, because the fact that there are no requirements for a comptroller and they have like a massive say on like the finances, I feel like by adding this requirement to only the VP would then question like what experience does the comptroller have in terms of finances to make decisions for founders, which is the biggest event on campus.
Yes, I would first correct your premise in that 97% of the budget is actually under the direction of the vice president, all the 4 programming boards and not the comptroller. But to just take the question in general, regardless of the specific arrangements of the budgets, I would welcome anyone's contribution for what would be a good requirement for other executives, but I don't think that diminishes the necessity for a requirement from the vice president. Sorry to interrupt you.
It's a follow-up question. So could we consider making requirements for all e-board positions, or is it like a one for all sort of thing?
Well, the Senate can do whatever it wants. I think I've had multiple instances in the process of this where I've told people, if you don't get everything you want, this isn't the only opportunity to ever amend the bylaws ever again. Like next week, there could be another bill to amend the bylaws after this. So I think if the Senate does go for more experience requirements for the other executives, that's totally within their prerogative. They just have to make sure that the requirements make sense. I think this experience requirement makes sense for the vice president, that they have some kind of demonstrated programming experience. And if there are other requirements for the other executives, I think it's definitely possible for that same sort of sensible option to be found.
Layla?
I would just like to talk about waiving first reading. Brian and the J board should be involved if we're thinking about, overturning our thing. So would you, overturning our rule, so would you be open to keeping this until the J board can be directly involved and kind of, explain our side of the story and not waive the first reading?
I think my reasons that I have for waiving first reading, those, I still agree with those, and I would disagree with both of the premises of your question. First, the J board is explicitly not supposed to have an opinion on the legislation before the undergraduate senate. They're supposed to be impartial, and I think it would be way out of line for them to say, this structural adjustment you're making is a bad idea in our opinion, and therefore you shouldn't pass it. And second, we're not overturning anything. I need to stress this again, that it's in the bylaws right now that the Senate can do this. And it's also in the judicial register, which is written by the J board chair. So even the J board itself has a standing rule that this ability of the Senate to check them is in place. So we're not overturning anything from the perspective of the bylaws or the judicial register.
Piper?
Do you think, Bobby, that by making, an experience requirement for VP or any e-board elected position, do you think that doesn't, from my perspective, that means that people have the privilege to have had the time to be in a position like this for a full year, get a major, major boost. From my perspective, I work 2 jobs. It's really hard to also put time into student government and time into my school, let alone make friends, have a community AU. And I think that do you think that this is privileging certain students over others that have the space and the time to take on a role like this?
That is a good question. And I think that this doesn't create any new avenues for people to have an unfair advantage over other people. I think just we should recognize that there are certain skills that you need to have in order to successfully be the vice president. And if you have, through whatever your personal circumstances are, been blocked from gaining those skills, that is unfortunate, and it does create, it does leave you less prepared to be vice president than someone who has had the opportunity to build those skills. But I don't think that means that student government should, go out of their way to make sure that people who don't have the skills in order to properly do the job are, encouraged to do the job. So yeah, I think there are inequities that are out of our hands, but it shouldn't stop us from making sure that qualified people can fill the positions.
Max?
All right, so what do you make of this? If that, let's say, because I agree with Piper's sentiment that a lot of it comes almost to long-term planning, because I would imagine that there are a fair amount of people who who end up getting involved in student governments throughout colleges in America who did not anticipate that they would get involved with it. Whether it's because there's a particular issue that comes up, whether they think suddenly that, okay, student government is doing some really bad things, the administration is doing some really bad things, the admin is doing something. I think that the medium by which I can best tackle those things is with student government. There might not be, the requisite planning in mind of these people that, okay, I'm going to get involved in and let's say they think that the vice president position or another e-board position that does have one of these requirements that we made is the best means for them to go about fixing whatever it is that they want to fix. And let's say they have incredible popular support, throughout campus. I'm thinking particularly at the College of the Debt that protested, because I remember that hearing that a bunch of them were considering running for student government positions. So what if we did have these requirements in place, and they had just never anticipated that? And I don't know what their qualifications are. But let's say they didn't anticipate that they would have to have this program experience, that they would have to have whatever experience we've decreed as necessary to be in one of these positions. Then I think that if they do have popular support, if students believe that these kids, these other students are the best people for these positions, then we're just creating barriers against what the students might want. And we are not allowing the students to truly vote for, who they think is going to best represent them. And then I think we're just doing a disservice. What would you think of that?
Well, I think that you're way inflating the scale of this experience requirement. That if you want to join student government and you have never done any of this before, but you're just inspired by some issue that you see on campus, even if we pass everything that's in these bylaws right now, you can run for president, you can run for secretary, you can run for comptroller, you can join the Senate, you can be a presidential cabinet director, you can be a case advocate, you can join KPU sub, Women's Initiative, or Founders, or you can just be an activist on your own terms. But we're not excluding anyone from joining student government in these bylaws except to be vice president. And I don't think it's appropriate for someone who doesn't have the requisite skills in order to do the job to just jump in, only just having discovered that they have an opinion about something that needs to be changed, and say, I want to oversee $500,000 and long-term contracts with famous individuals and important speakers. I think it is completely reasonable for us, when we're entrusted with $500,000 of student money that goes to programming every year, to make sure that the person who manages that has a proper understanding of how production works, about how contracts with speakers work, about how confidentiality works. All these things that you can only experience through having a programming background. So if you want to have advocacy and you're inspired to be an advocate in student government, the vice president isn't even the job you're looking for. That's putting on shows. So we're not excluding anyone from student government, except when it is of the utmost necessity that they have technical skills in order to manage an incredibly important position where a lot could go wrong and have real consequences.
Katie?
So this is kind of first a comment and then a question. I would agree with what you just said, that experience is important. I'm on the executive board of a fairly small club on campus, and having no real prior experience dealing with managing funds or a membership was struggling at least. And so I reached out to a lot of people and tried to figure out the process to understand how to do these things, how to work with AUCC and SI to get funding for events, having no prior experience in that. So I do agree that having some experience is a good idea, especially when, like, we're talking about a club right now where maybe 200 people that I manage, and this is the entire student body. So I would agree that definitely some prior leadership experience or dealing with student government in general is a plus. And I was just wondering if you had consulted with the current vice president regarding this change, and if not,
Yeah, so I did not personally, like myself, Talila, correspond about this change, but her cabinet directors, Yaz and Visa, did. And they were on the commission. Yaz and Visa were the director of KPU and some, and not the vice president herself. I think she chose not to be on that. So yeah, they corresponded with her, I corresponded with them. And I also talked with all the other members of this commission, the president's office, comptroller's office, and the Senate about this change. So that was the extent of the correspondence there. And now I'm talking about it with all of you.
Jacob?
The more, I have a comment and then a question. The more I'm listening, the more I think, I understand that we want to give students the right to vote for a vice president, whether it be, a lack of, they're running on a platform of experience or lack of experience. But the more I'm listening to it, especially hearing Katie speak, I do think it is important that the vice president does have some kind of experience, because it is a lot of money that's being handled, and it is a big responsibility. And so I can understand that. The only question that I have is it says here specifically, 1 year at SG programming boards or equivalent experience as certified by student activities. Could you give some examples on what equivalent experience would be, and who is deciding what that equivalent experience is? And is the candidate for office able to explain why this experience qualifies them to be vice president? I'm thinking not just about anything with Greek life, I'm thinking about potential internships or jobs or things like that. So could you elaborate on what equivalent experience means and who gets to decide what equivalent experience is?
So to the second question, it's right there that it's a certified by student activities. And I think they work really closely with us, and they have established like de facto requirements for executives that like this year, for instance, without a legitimate excuse or reason that you can't fulfill this obligation, they're expecting all the executives to be here in July, for instance. So that is the who, and I think they're the best because it has to be an impartial actor. The best thing we could do in student government would be the elections commission, maybe, but I don't want to like have them say you can run and you can't arbitrarily. So I think they're the best removed third party for that. And then examples of what programming experience could be, like currently running for vice president is Carolyn Mejia, who, in addition to having experience on Founders Day, which would be covered by student government experience in there, she also has been programming director for LASSO, I think, or LULAC, one or the other, but I think it's LASSO. And yeah, you mentioned Greek organizations, they put on a lot of programs. College Democrats, College Republicans, they put on a lot of programs. A new organization this year is the Alexander Hamilton Society, who puts on debates about foreign policy. The AU International Relations Society hosts a giant model UN conference here, so on and so forth. A ton of our organizations on campus do programming, so whoever is in charge of that or works on that in those clubs has programming experience.
Mr. Bell?
Yeah, I think you're like 100% right, going off of Katie, as well as like my own experience.
And you're KPU finance
Yeah.
coordinator.
Yeah, like even being on KPU for, like a year and a half now, on top of being involved with College Republicans and whatnot, Alexander Hamilton Society, putting on, doing production in that sense, I still feel that I would, if I was elected vice president, or if I was to be one of the
Executives?
one of the other directors for any of the programming branches, like I still feel I would walk into the role in, still like having a lot to learn and still not understanding a lot of what happens. So I definitely think that this requirement is essentially necessary. And I was going to ask you, aside from this, did you consider any other requirements for any of the other, either the president, comptroller, or
Secretary.
Oh yeah, or the secretary. Did you think about including any requirements for those positions as well? And if so, what were they? Maybe just start.
Yeah, I think that at our commission meeting that like the concept was brought up in the context of the same context, like if we're having one for the vice president, should we have one for these other ones? And that consideration was brief and it didn't go anywhere because, number one, we concluded that the vice president is in a different category with the kind of technical experience and the amount of technical experience that they need to have in order to do the job well. And second, we couldn't, nothing came to mind of what, an experience requirement for these other executive positions are. Like if you're president and you're working with administrators on advocacy, that's not really something, for example, that you can get experience in. Like, it's not really the kind of process that's out there in other capacities in the same way, unless you want to limit it to like people who have been in like a cabinet position or in the Senate, which is no good in my opinion. But yeah, that was a very brief consideration and it didn't go anywhere.
Piper?
So I'm wondering, of course, these people who get elected should have experience that is going to aid them in their position. And of course, there's going to be a huge learning curve, whether you have experience or not. Like that is just the fact of the matter. But first of all, do you not agree that it should be up to the voters if the person they're electing is qualified? That's my first question. My second question is, could we not write into the bylaws something about the transition period and what executives should do to prepare the next set of executives?
Yeah, so to the first question, of course, it's up to the voters to decide to a certain degree, but we don't give it in the status quo or under this proposal an absolute carte blanche for the voters to decide, because right now we have the 45 credit requirement, and even though that does constrict the ability of voters to decide who the vice president or any of the executives should be to a certain degree, it's for a good reason, and that's number one, we think you should have been in the AU community for some period of time before you represent the entire community, and second, you can talk to Chris Schneider about this, who was an executive through a technicality of appointment before he got 45 credits, and he said it absolutely destroyed his sophomore year of high school or college. Yeah, it destroyed his sophomore year here because at that point in your academic career, when you're still figuring out exactly how you operate at the university level, to throw in such a giant commitment of being secretary throws everything out of whack. So that requirement, to take that example, it does restrict the ability of voters to decide, but it's for a good reason. We have the ability to, institute policies and restrictions if they serve a good purpose, a legitimate interest. And I think we also have the legitimate interest in making sure that if, we're going to be given $500,000 to do programming with, that it's spent well. I don't think anyone has the right or anyone should expect, like, as a matter of course, that they should have the ability to manage $500,000 of other people's money. I think it's perfectly reasonable to require some kind of competence with that responsibility.
Or what about my second question about transition?
Oh yeah, transition, thanks. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm not sure how we would put it into the bylaws, but I think a good transition is always better than a not good transition. I think that's good.
Are there questions related to other changes in the
Yeah, Layla.
proposal? Layla?
You said that we had to remain impartial, and I actually just checked the bylaws and stuff. Instead of, it's in the new proposals, it's saying any decision and or sanctions, but in the bylaws, it just says sanctions. So again, why wouldn't you not include J board, especially considering that if Senate is allowed to overturn, how are you ensuring that Senate will remain impartial? Because
the Senate isn't supposed to remain impartial. It is a representative political body. The J board is supposed to remain impartial, and that's why you guys should not be commenting on the political matter of reforming the bylaws. But just to put everything in more context, John Shapiro, who is the chair of the J board, 3 J board chairs before Brian, was friends with the candidate for comptroller, and he inappropriately abused his authority to break into the room. He walked in, but he was not supposed to, into the room where they were looking at election results before the elections had been certified. And he saw that his friend had lost the race for comptroller. So he conspired in a group chat with the other members of the J board to prevent the Senate from certifying that race. And if he had his way, he was going to kick the winning candidate of the comptroller's race out of the race because his friend lost. And there was no ability for anyone to stop him because the J board had the final authority. Now, the J Board Chair, 2 chairs after him, who happened to be Speaker of the Senate at the time, found this loophole where he declared a state of exception and nullified the judicial register. And there was a whole 2-hour meeting where the Senate was trying to figure out what the hell happened and what's going on. And it just so happened that there was this way, just by the skin of their teeth, that the Senate was able to stop one person from completely stealing an executive election where the person was going to be paid $8,000 in student money. But we shouldn't have it be such a Bailey, a hook and Bailey wire solution. We should have it where the J Board isn't able to go rogue and do absolutely whatever they want. So that, again, is the reason why that's in the bylaws and the judicial register, which is maintained by the J Board.
You're assuming that this current J Board is not capable of having clear minds and not.
No, I've known Brian for a long time. He's great. I'm friends with Alex and Eric as well. I confirmed the other 2 of you, you and Heyman. You're all great people, but some J Board chairs are not good people. John Shapiro was able to almost throw an election based on personal friendship. The J Board chair after him, she was fine, but she didn't really have a lot of familiarity with the rules. So yeah, J Board chairs change from chair to chair, and we should have institutional checks on them so that we don't have to rely on the personal characteristics of each individual chair.
And follow up, you're not applying that to Senate as in, I'm sure Senate is close. I don't know the relationships within Senate, but you are saying that it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't.
No, there are checks on the Senate as well. The president can veto Senate actions. There are 30 members in the Senate, so one individual can't exert undue authority. The J Board can invalidate Senate decisions, except where the Senate uses its authority to check the J Board as well. So there are checks from every part of this institution against every other one, and we need to make sure as much as we can that one individual can't cause a bunch of trouble. And I would say again that we need to have the J Board remain impartial in political proceedings.
Questions not related to the executive board / the vice president's role specifically? Curtis?
Yes, quick question for Bob. In
Mhm.
your opinion, should the governing documents of the AU student government reflect the functions and attributes of an aristocracy or democracy?
I will say a constitutional parliamentary monarchy.
Jacob?
Thank you, Bobby. On the question of the J Board, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. This is not in response to this J Board, this is in response to previous J Boards and making sure that there's a check.
Yes.
And then as a follow-up question, okay, thank you, yes.
No, but I have more.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
but as a follow-up question, if the Senate were to overturn a J Board ruling or something, could the president veto that ruling?
Yeah, okay. So to the first question, this is not about this J Board, and I need to say again, this is not a Bobby's, it's my idea. It was in the bylaws before this. I didn't write that part of the bylaws. It was in the judicial register before this. The J Board writes the judicial register. This was because of a specific incident where the J Board, one individual, tried to throw a wrench in our operations. So yeah, and about the specific question of whether the president could overturn it, under the current rules, no. The current rules just require the Senate to do it with a majority vote. And as a matter of fact, the only thing I did to this requirement in the new draft bylaws is that I increased the burden for the Senate to overturn a J Board decision from a majority to 2/3. So I'm really giving the J Board more credit in this draft change.
Sean?
In terms of the application of the Senate term, will it apply to this Senate or the next Senate after this? So would we serve from this point on till January?
Yeah, if this is adopted in the current Senate, then the term of the Senate would extend until January 1st, 2020.
Max?
Not to beat that horse. But just to kind of further conclude that J Board dialogue that you guys are having. So here's something I was wondering if you agree with Robbie, and I hate likening our body to actual government, but in the real U.S. Congress, now when legislation is being created, the Supreme Court doesn't look then the Supreme Court would become involved, and, you know, the judicial branch would become involved. The judicial branch would have no input on the actual changes to government prior to their changes being implemented. Isn't that correct, Bobby? Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, when the real Senate is making laws, RPG does not come in, and give her input. That's what you were asking, like the Supreme Court doesn't have an active process in the creation of legislation in the real world? Yeah, that's correct.
Other questions, Curtis?
Last question for Bobby. Should members of the AU student body or members of the AU student government decide who is best to hold an executive office?
Well, I should note that the members of the AU student government are members of the student body. I'm a junior in SIS, for instance. But I think, again, this is about the vice presidential experience requirement, and I take it from your question that you're concerned that we are changing the rules of elections to limit the availability and taking away the absolute power of the voters to decide whoever they want. And I would just reiterate that we do have, in the current system, policies that apply some restriction to that authority to make sure to serve a legitimate end. We have the 45 credit requirement because from past experience with real executives under 45 credits aren't ready in terms of a transition to college from high school and in terms of familiarizing themselves with the AU community to be executives. We already have that. That philosophical debate has been settled. The only question that remains is whether an experience requirement for vice president is a good idea or not. And I think I've talked about why it is.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Without objection, this will be referred to CRP.
I object. I move to waive first reading.
I second.
I hear a second. Discussion on waiving first reading. Jacob?
I'm gonna say two things on this. The first thing is I agree with Bobby that for the most part, I disagree with always waiving first reading. I think though that this is a circumstance where it has been well researched. Waiving first reading is well warranted in this case. I'm gonna agree with Bobby on the reason that he's laid out. On the second thing, conversation about the VP requirements, I definitely am concerned that we're adding unnecessary barriers to entry. The more I think about it, and the more I really think about the role of the vice, something that I've been thinking about is this. Out of the current candidates who are right now running for vice president, would any of them be excluded under this new sort of requirement? And the answer to that question is no, they would not be excluded. So it wouldn't impact this election right now. And I don't feel as though it would have a great big impact on other elections. I think we want to see the success of the vice president because their success is a shared success amongst all student groups and the student body. And I think that this body understands what is required uniquely of certain positions, and without adding too high barriers of entry, I think we are well within our sort of rights and responsibilities to ensure that. So I don't believe that this is a high barrier to entry. I think it's well worth it. That's why I'll be voting for all of it.
Bobby?
About the motion to waive first reading, I would just note again, like this has already been reviewed by a lot of people who are who constitute almost a majority of CRP for the Senate delegation to this commission. And I would also note that when CRP does meet, it didn't meet this week, but when it does meet, it's normally about half an hour late. So I think this would, if it even did go to CRP next week, we would get a very brief discussion there. So I think we can just skip that and do it now where we have everyone who is committed enough to show up here today, and we can get it in place for when the next executive board is here so that they can start their term with these rules in place instead of having things up in the air.
Tanya?
One question about so will for the little like policy books, will those be made by the outgoing members or by the
The enactment clause of this bill says that those are due at the first meeting in the next academic year. And I put due instead of required just to allow some semblance of flexibility. So yeah, if, in like the secretary's case, Alex could write it, or the next secretary-elect could write it, just as long as it gets done, in a reasonable amount of time.
Could there be a way that minutes of the previous one? Maybe so it could be sort of kind of a slight transition.
Well, if we waive first reading, that amendment can be made on the floor.
Who's read the entirety of the documents that were sent in the meeting packet?
I have.
Even the policy books?
Everything that's sent in the meeting packet. Raise your hand if you read the entirety of
Mr.
them.
Speaker, is this your impartiality clause? I don't know about that.
What?
Like, how does this interact, this question, with the clause of the bylaws that say you have to be impartial on motions on the floor?
I'm just asking a question. There's nothing to do with my partiality. Okay, further discussion on waiving first reading. Curtis?
I move to call the previous.
Okay,
That's
so yeah, so you're just ending, you're okay. Is there a second to closing debate?
Second.
I hear a second. All those in favor of closing debate and moving to vote on waiving first reading, say yay.
Yay.
All those opposed say nay. Okay. All those in favor of waiving first reading, say yay.
Yay.
All those opposed say nay. Okay, being the chair, the yeas have it. Wait, first reading is waived.
I sent you the Google Doc version of this in case there are any amendments.
Okay. So this moves right into second reading, which means we'll go right to, without objection, we'll move right into discussion on the bill. Okay, hearing none, we're in discussion on Bill 18-19-004. Curtis.
The addition of the requirement for a vice president to have programming experience in student government on a programming board or have an equivalent programming experience certified by the Office of Student Activities adds an unnecessary barrier and requirement to our bylaws. Bobby and the others are correct about having a 45 credit limit because as we see in our current government, the vice president of the United States needs to be 35 years old. There's an age requirement, there's a residency requirement and citizenship requirement for vice presidents of the United States. And imagine if our vice president needed to have experience in Congress or whatnot about, let's say, they need to have some sort of, legislative experience. Imagine if that happened. That's exactly what's happening now in our AU student government. And our AU student government is moving towards one of an aristocracy where we are deciding who is qualified, who has the experience to be vice president of our student government, and we are just not getting it straight when it comes to giving power to the student body. We should not be restricting people from, running by creating this qualifications to run because the people are the best to decide who is qualified to be elected as vice president of the AU student government.
Jacob?
Yeah, imagine if the US government required the president to have some kind of government experience. How crazy would that be? Maybe we get stuff done. But in any event, once again, I don't think it's the correct equivalency to compare this governing body to actual other real governing bodies that exist in the world. I don't think that the barrier of entry is too high because it says specifically or equivalent experience. So somebody could, I'm just genuinely interested in somebody who has not had programming experience before, but has had other kinds of experience, what that might look like, what that person might bring to the table, when it says equivalent experience. And I hope that the student activity group or person is able to vet all of that accordingly. I don't think the barrier of entry is too high here because we, like I said previously, we want the success of the vice president. It is a large responsibility to oversee vast amounts of programming. As Bobby said very specifically a few meetings ago, the AUSG is essentially a programming board that does a few other things. For the most part, we do programming. And I think that it's not at all a high barrier of entry to require that the person who will be overseeing all that programming understands the programming, knows what it is we're supposed to be doing. With that, I think I've made my point clear, and I think that it's laid out very clear. And I understand that there are some concerns about people who have made privilege. I do want to say that it does say or equivalent experience, and I think somebody can be bringing in all different kinds of equivalent experiences to that position. So for those reasons, I'm going to be voting for all of this, including the VP experience. I encourage you.
Bobby?
Yeah, I would like to point out that we're not excluding anyone from getting programming experience. Anyone can, or except for circumstances that are out of our control as an organization, like Piper mentioned, where for whatever your personal circumstances, for a variety of reasons, you can't get programming experience. That is the only instance in where this requirement would exclude someone from getting the experience necessary to be vice president. But just by having this experience requirement to be vice president, we're not stopping anyone from joining 4 of our programming boards, which have, I think, like 100 people in their organizations in total. You can look on our staff directory online. There's a lot of people in those programming boards, and there's even more in all of the programming activities going on by all of our other student organizations. No one is stopping anyone from getting programming experience. And if you want to be entrusted with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student money to do programming on behalf of the entire student body, like that is a privilege. No one should expect that as a matter of course.
Katie?
So first I wanted to address our vice president versus US vice president. I also dislike the comparison. I would argue that current vice president of the United States does far less programming than the vice president of American University. So that's just like point to put out there. Also, I would argue that, I would support this experience requirement. It seems very irrational to, at a time where we're critiquing how student money is spent, we're looking at the over $100,000 spent on families and the criticism from students over that and how else students are going to spend money, to then allow students the potential to elect someone who does not have any experience managing that money, when we're already looking at the person who have some experience. So I think if we're going to be getting the current debates on campus, we should have someone with experience come to the role of vice president and ensure that they do have that experience to manage funds correctly, rather than someone who is more inexperienced, especially given the large amount of money that the vice president's office deals with in all this program.
Piper?
I think that was a really strong point from you, Katie. My question, it's very specific, but this says 1 year of experience. I really wonder, what does 1 year of experience mean? Does it mean that you were the president, you were on the e-board of AUDEMS for, I won't use that because that's like factual, of Alexander Hamilton Society from October through August, and then you stopped? Does that count as a year? Legitimately, if we're gonna do a 1 year requirement, I think you need to, what counts as 1 year? Is it 1 school year? 2 full semesters? Yeah, I really think that should be specific if we're gonna give this kind of requirement. I disagree with this kind of requirement on the strong belief that we are elected by people to represent people, and that they should, the student body, and that they should be the ones who choose. But if we're gonna have this, I think that it needs to be extremely specific in what it means to 1 year. Or it could be something else. It could be, has at least 1 programming event under their belt. You know what I mean? Maybe it doesn't have to be a year. But I think if there's going to be a requirement, let's make it specific. even though 1 year does sound specific, like, I'm still wondering what it means.
Bobby?
Yeah, I think that is a legitimate discussion to be had. I would just add, for everyone's information background, that I chose that phrasing to be vague, so that, if someone has been, running a whole bunch of programming for 7 months and 15 days at the time that election starts, and then the bylaws say 8 months of programming experience, that we don't create this weird, you would be eligible if only for 10 more days or whatever. Yeah, so that's just the background. I think since the certification is going on by student activities, I generally trust their judgment in terms of looking at facts and determining whether that is sufficient enough to be 1 year's of programming experience. But that's just background information, and I would welcome if anyone else has comments on that.
Curtis?
So just to touch on the basics of my comparison with the US Vice President and the, Vice President of Student Government, that I understand the argument on the other side. However, what I do not understand is the lack of consistency when it comes to the accountability of our, keeping members of our student government accountable for consistency, because if we are creating a restriction, or let's say a requirement, if we are creating a requirement to run for the vice presidency, we should also require a requirement for the comptroller, who deals with a lot of money. Shouldn't they have experience also? And when it comes to the secretary under Article 4, Section 1, Subsection 1, secretary shall be responsible for administering the communications of student government, including the student government website and social media. So when it comes to managing a website, what if a student wants to learn about the role of secretary and wants to become a secretary, but let's say we are applying the same concept, the same principle that we are applying to the vice president, we should also apply it to the secretary. Otherwise, that would create essentially a contradiction, a hypocrisy in our bylaws when it comes to making sure that each member of the AU Student Government Executive Board has the appropriate experience and qualifications to run for office. To run for office, you should just only have 45 credits. That's it. Leave the rest of the decision to the people, to the student body. Just like Piper said, I agree wholeheartedly that we should keep the current requirements in place and just completely slash this vice presidential requirement and create a bill that deals with the specificity of this requirement to run for office.
Max?
Okay, so I don't have a solution here, because just remind of that. So at first, I was pretty opposed to this. Since then, I've moved, but not fully accepting this. I'm very conflicted, because part of me is really opposed to putting stringent requirements that prevent students from truly picking who they want. At the same time, we might say that now, and then what happens, and I trust all the vice presidential candidates this year wholeheartedly. But, let's say in the future, we get a vice presidential candidate who didn't fit this requirement, or fit any type of, who ends up botching this because of lack of experience. When I say botch, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in student government, of student money. And when faith in student governance is already at a low, botching something like that can be pretty damn bad. So looking at it from that perspective, even if it's not really, I don't think there's a best case scenario when it comes to something that's going to truly make everyone happy. But at the same time, there might be something that's going to possibly prevent something bad from happening. I'm not really sure this is it. And at the same time, looking at other e-board positions, this is definitely one that, and I also think this might apply to secretary, because I don't believe people understand how much work goes into secretary. And I possibly also control. I think president's the one that it's just out of the sea. You can make of that what you will, and of them requirements. But at the same time, when we're talking about vice president, I would really also care to hear what Leela has to say. I understand that we consult with programming directors, but I would, that's my view, that I think Leela could offer some instruction on that.
Jacob?
So I'd like to say a few things. Number one, I agree with you, Curtis. I think there should be other requirements perhaps on other e-board positions. So if you'd like to work together on a bill like that, because today's not the only day we can be doing this, I would work with you on a bill like that, because I don't think people understand how tough it is being on an e-board, how tough, like all the different requirements and things that you're gonna have to be investing in. So I agree, maybe there should be other requirements, because I really wholeheartedly agree with this requirement. I would just like to say, if people really feel that strongly against this, you can propose an amendment, you can propose to strike this completely, but like, it's time to put the pedal to the metal. If you don't like this, if you really want to see it go, let's have some action. I think we've all discussed at length why we want this, why some of us don't want this. I think it's entirely reasonable and entirely well within our authority to say, if you want to run, if you want to be in charge of over $500,000 of money that goes towards programming, that you should have experience in programming, some kind of pertinent experience, whether it's SG-related experience or other kinds of experience. Maybe you've worked in some kind, maybe an internship with an event planning company or something like that. Like, that's something that I think comes when it comes to reasonable experience. But so I think it's time to put the pedal to the metal. If people want to see some kind of change, let's do it. Let's debate it. But I'm supporting this wholeheartedly.
Okay, did you have something?
Yeah, just one last thing I want to add, when you were talking about this earlier, saying that the 45 credit limit on, people running for office was to be for student benefit, like getting the experience of being a student at AU, becoming familiar with everything. And so I would argue that this programming plan for the vice president is similar to that. It's for student benefit to have their money managed responsibly. And I would think that it's unwise and to go off of kind of what Matt mentioned earlier, detrimental if someone were in the position of vice president and they didn't really know what they were doing and mismanaged half of the budget of student money. I think that's that.
Sean?
Yeah, and then just going off all the points that were made, the students are still having the authority to select their vice president. We're not in any way taking that ability, that right away from them. The only thing that we are doing is for their benefit, we're making sure that a qualified individual is running for vice president, so the individual can effectively execute the role for their benefit.
Curtis?
So when we're looking at changing the bylaws, we have to look at it in the sense where we, as an undergraduate senate, are improving upon the status quo. And we need to be consistent with, if we are making a change to the bylaws, to the status quo, then we really need to ensure that not only the vice president has, a qualification to run, but also the comptroller and the secretary. Because when I hear that the argument that, the vice president has a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars to manage, that's true, but when it comes to spending, when it comes to allocating money to organizations within student government, the true power lies with the VAC, the committee that really looks at the budget and sees, how much money goes to each organization. And really, when you look at it, the vice president isn't on the VAC. It's the president, it's the comptroller, and it's the finance committee chair of the Senate. So when I hear the argument that the vice president has a lot of money to manage, and they need to have programming experience, I think it's the burden to Bobby and whoever is changing the bylaws, for them to prove that this is a necessary qualification to run. And if it's a necessary qualification to run, that we must remain consistent with the vice president as we are with the comptroller, as we are with the secretary, but in particular the comptroller, because the main mission of this bylaws commission was to look at the comptroller position. And the comptroller sits on the budgetary advisory committee. And the comptroller should have the required financial experience when it comes to dealing with this matter. So if I were to agree with the other side when it comes to, let's say, passing the bylaws as is, I would need reassurance from the other side to say that we are also going to make this qualification for comptroller, where the comptroller needs to have 1 year of financial experience being a treasurer in any student organization, just so that this student body, this student government remains consistent with itself.
Bobby?
I move to amend the enactment clause of the bill, just to add a sentence at the end that says, nothing in these changes shall affect the current spring 2019 elections.
Adding the ending sentence you said?
Yeah, the enactment clause.
Nothing in what?
Nothing in these changes shall affect the spring 2019 elections. Can I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, is there discussion on this?
Yeah, just for reference, I'm not I think Milan would make a fine vice president, but I'm not entirely sure whether he would fit these qualifications per se. So just trying to make sure we don't ruin an election inadvertently while it's going on.
Further discussion on this amendment? Yes, Curtis?
So when we're looking at this particular amendment, we have to be asking ourselves, why are we making this amendment? Does it make sense to make this amendment? And essentially, are we making this amendment to, let's say, because the bylaws that were originally proposed and sent to us 2 days ago in an email, that the bylaws would prevent a qualified candidate, specifically in this case, Milan Burgess, from running for vice president? Ask yourself this question: why are we making this amendment? Is it because the bylaws that were proposed and introduced by Senator Zisman are potentially flawed, where we are possibly preventing perfectly qualified candidates from running for a position? So we really have to think about the original intent of making this qualification to run. The qualification being that you need a year of programming experience, as stipulated by, if you're involved with one of our organization in AUSG, or, student activity certifies that you have been involved in some sort of program. The people should decide whether or not you have that qualification. And when it comes to this amendment, think about it. Does the amendment truly represent the values of our student government when it comes to consistency and when it comes to accountability? Because the original, requirements to run were only 45 credits, and it should stay that way. So think about, why are we making this amendment? It's because the proposed changes to the bylaws are inherently flawed when it comes to saying that, you need to have certain programming qualifications for that. Think about it.
Jacob?
The reason that we're putting this in is because if you're going to be handling almost over $500,000 of student money, you should have some kind of experience. Now, I want to continually point to where it says, or other kinds of, let me read the exact wording, or equivalent experience.
Steer towards this amendment.
Yeah, so I just want to say that I think Bobby's done what needs to be done. I think this is fine. And implementing it after the fact, giving it that buffer time, I think it's a good idea.
Bobby?
Yeah, just to clarify, if I don't know the particulars of Milan's experience, but if it turns out that he wouldn't fit under this qualification, I think anyone identical to him in future years should not run for vice president, but it would be totally inappropriate for me to change things in the middle of an election. So that's the only reason for this retroactive effectiveness.
Danya?
he has had extensive programming experience, just not in like the vice president's cabinet, so I think he would still qualify. So I think personally that this wouldn't weed out, I think it wouldn't weed out the people who generally run, because I think most people who run realize that they need programming.
Stick towards the amendment.
What?
Keep conversation towards the amendment.
Oh, okay, but yeah, so. Okay. Can I motion to go the amendment?
There's a motion to vote on the amendment.
Second.
Here, a second.
Second.
Yeah.
We have 9, but if it's 18 or less, we have quorum. Or no, if it's under 18, we have quorum. If not, let me get on the phone.
God.
You got a point.
No.
How many members do we have total?
19.
Oh, okay, well, we need 2 people, no, we need 1 person.
One person either needs, someone needs to show up.
Yeah. All right. We'll just see. Asher, would you want to be a proxy for somebody?
Sure.
Well, that's not-
I don't think you could do that. I don't think that'd be a good idea. You could, I
Well,
don't
it's
think it'd
not
be a good
against the
idea.
rules. from
It's not
Jacob's
against the
perspective,
rules.
But it might be the Eagles'
It's
rules.
probably almost.
Okay,
Depending.
can I see you put it in the hallway? Yes? No?
Why not?
I mean, doesn't
Why
really
not?
matter.
I mean, let's do it, it just, yeah, let's do it, it just. It's a shame, it's a shameless speaker for the lack of senators present at this meeting.
Yep.
It does not reflect well on this body, and
I also think we had quorum before, and we should also always be proposing actions. And continually dialogue is great, but if we're just saying the same thing over and over again, and we don't actually move towards action, I think that moves people to just think that we're not gonna be acting on anything. So just throwing it out there.
Trevor, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
for you. So when senators leave meetings in the middle of a meeting, how does that count against attendance?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Is there a way for this body, possibly, in the Committee on Accessibility, Transparency, and Accountability, for that committee to enact Senate rules to ensure that we have senators who are committed for at least the majority of this meeting?
Also, just a proxy note, the request for the proxy has to make from the senator. It can't be made from somebody else.
I know.
Savon says she wants to make a proxy.
Also, Colleen had, texted me earlier asking if I could have a proxy for her in her proxy left, so she still has, given me a permission to give her a proxy.
The senator has to designate the proxy
A
themselves.
specific person,
Yes.
I mean, I can send it to the rules.
In this meantime, y'all can read the court paper that the Attorney General released on.
Or y'all could just read the documents.
You want me to read?
Yes.
Well, it says that the report doesn't find that the president did anything wrong, but it also doesn't exonerate him, so that's like the key line of people.
What is exonerating?
Clear, and it doesn't say that he did technically do it.
Trevor, just in the interest of decorum, I move to call recess until we reach quorum.
No.
Can't even do that.
I mean, yes.
We're still in
We
session.
can't consider motions without
Yeah,
quorum.
you
You
can't
can
go.
consider motions at that point.
Yeah.
We're just stuck here.
Yeah, just give me a couple.
So it's like an informal recess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I called Tom, I texted him. I got a proxy. Let's see. We have a person?
That's all.
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm good, how are you?
Okay, good plan.
What's your name?
Oh,
Here.
Well, let me ask Siobhan. No, just one. We need 10 people present.
I need the senator to make the request themselves.
Okay, Siobhan said yes.
Sure, question mark.
That's an affirmative response.
I need the senator to send me the request.
Yeah, that's good.
It's on Facebook Messenger. You're on this
But she
chat.
didn't request it, so why?
She did.
Is that an official request?
It's in writing.
It says it can be in any meeting.
What is sure question mark?
Yeah,
It's affirmative response.
it's up to Trevor's discretion. Trevor has to decide if it's been made by the senator and included or not. That's what the bylaws say.
Okay. So can I call?
Great, then we'll call Colin.
Yeah, I'm calling.
Yeah, you can just sit there.
Yeah, you take your word.
Hi, can I ask you if you're willing to, have
Colin Wessel Camper.
Colin
Wessel Camper.
Wessel Camper proxy for you? Colin Wessel Camper, can you proxy for you?
Oh, look at that, Trevor. Facebook Messenger.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, now who's
Bye.
Well, Trevor gets to decide which request to accept.
Yeah, Savon's guy I got first, so.
Okay,
All right, excellent.
whatever works.
Okay. All those in favor of the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment, which reads, nothing in these changes shall affect the 2019 spring election, say yay.
Yay.
All those opposed say nay. In the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment's adopted. We're back to the bill as a whole. Further discussion on the bill and the bylaws and the policy book. There's a motion to vote.
Second.
I hear a second. All those in favor of, sorry. All those in favor of closing debate and moving to vote say yay.
Yay.
All those opposed say nay.
Okay, just point of inquiry.
Point of inquiry.
Were amendments supposed to be made during discussion?
But yeah,
That's, yeah.
Okay.
division on that.
Okay, division is requested. All those in favor of closing the vote and moving to closing debate and moving to vote say yay. I mean, raise your hand so I can see the yays. All those opposed? In the opinion of the chairs, the yeas have it. Debate is closed. All those now in favor of adopting Bill 18-19-004, which includes the new bylaws and the budget policy book, as the legislation is currently written, say yay.
Yay.
All those opposed say nay. Technically, this needs a 2/3.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we.
Do I get a
division, and I move that we vote, I motion that we vote by voice vote.
Wait,
Yeah, you need to.
you just wait. Yeah, you just voted by voice vote. Okay, you called division is requested. All those in favor of adopting Bill 18-19-004, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Being the chair, the 2/3 is met and the bill is adopted. Okay. Moving to election of a chair of the Special Committee on Finance. The floor is now open for nominations. Danya.
I nominate.
Is there a second? Hearing no second. Sean.
I nominate
nominate Jacob Robbins.
Is there a second?
Second.
Jacob, do you accept the nomination?
I do accept this.
Danya,
I nominate Piper.
This is just for the chair
Just for
election.
the chair.
Okay.
okay, any other nominations for chair? Seeing, Danya,
Wait, so you're seeing none and then I'll raise my
seeing none, the floor is closed for nominations. Danya,
I move to unanimous consent since there's only one person running and he's been on finance as the vice chair.
technically, I think the procedure would be suspending the rules to move right to voting, and then you can request the vote. So I would do that, I would request that first.
Suspend the rules.
Second.
Move to voting.
Okay, there's a motion to suspend the rules and move right to voting on the chair, and I hear a second. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing no discussion, oh,
I just want to say, I am the only person, but it still is a big committee, so if any, we're make sure you're all clear on this, that you're suspending the rules to put me as the chairman. I'm fine, I would like to be the chairman, at the same time, it is a big committee, and I'm about to undertake a big thing. Are you all sure that you don't have any questions for me or anything? Whatever.
other discussion on suspending the rules? Danya,
The reason why I did that was not to neglect the fact that it's a big committee. I realize it's a big committee, but I realize that you've done a lot of work for the past year and a half now or something like that. So I do think that that it would only be right.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
any further discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules and moving to voting, say yay.
Yay.
All those opposed say nay. Being the chair, the ayes have it, and we are moving to voting. Danya,
Move to vote on unanimous consent.
is there a second?
Second.
Is there any objection to electing Senator Robbins as the chair of the Finance Committee? Hearing none, so be it.
Are we doing members now?
Did you also did you resign from the Finance Committee as a whole?
I didn't have any other capacity other than chair, so yes.
Okay, well, because technically you could resign your
Well, if I
title.
resign chair, I don't.
Yeah, I don't think he has a seat on finance other than chair.
So now there's an open seat.
Well, okay, well, technically there's 7 seats.
Yeah, and I was one of them, and I'm not anymore.
Okay, just making sure. The floor is now open for nominations to serve as a member of the Special Finance Committee. Jacob,
If you'd like to, I'd like to nominate Piper as chairman.
is there a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Piper, do you accept the nomination? Nominations accepted. Danya,
I move to nominate Kurt.
is there a second? I hear a second. Do you accept the nomination? Nominations accepted. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, the floor is now closed. And we'll move to speeches. First, the Piper.
Perfect, I prepared, that 10 minutes. Should I talk?
You have 4, so
4 minutes. Should I go now or should we wait?
that's up to you. Well, actually, yeah, go now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you first for nominating me. That's really nice. Bobby brought this up to me a little while ago about what I want to be part of the finance committee, especially because it's really important that we're doing budgets right now. At first I was kind of like, I don't know that much about money. But then, you explained, well, it's not really about knowing about economics. It's more about choosing how much money goes into everything. And I think that that's really important. I guess I would say that what makes me qualified is not really anything that makes me qualified over any other person, and I would never argue that, but I'm consistently at meetings, I'm consistently running my committees that I do, and I hope that committee members could speak to that, if that were to come to question. I think student government is important. I'm invested in it growing in a positive way to positively impact students at AU and to be a part of the community, a part of a future community that we can really have. And that's why I think being on the finance committee is really important. And being sure that like we're serving our community effectively and appropriately with the amount of money that we allocate. And I think also like being pretty new to student government, I mean, you know, I've been in it almost 2 semesters. Well, I guess not really, like a semester and a half at this point. Like I don't have, I guess, a lot of personal stake in like what places get which money, if that makes sense. Like I haven't been here for a long time, have like a certain preference to KBU getting money or something like that. So I think I would be more critical about presentations of the aspects of student government and what they would want, just because like I don't have a ton of bias towards one section or another. That's kind of that. I would do my best. I would listen to all sides of it. I would try to allocate money in a way that is going to be best for students, and that's going to be frugal, but also like let people get stuff done, you know. And I mean that's all I can promise, right? Is that I would do my best, that I would show up, and yeah, I appreciate the nomination. Thank you.
Questions for Piper? Bobby?
Can you tell us about the work you've done with other students and administrators as chair of the fund committee?
Yeah, fun has been a really big learning experience, which I think is super important. I essentially learned that student activities existed, and like had a little bit of contact with Ayana and Maya about like putting on programming events. I've also I think we've had like 5 official meetings at this point, which I know is a lot more than other committees have had. But we actually have been partnering with RHA, and that's going to be continued probably through next semester. I don't know, does that answer your question? Cool.
Other questions for the nominee? Seeing none, thank you. Curtis, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Senator Adams, for nominating me to serve as a member of the Finance Committee. So first, my priority as a member of this committee is to ensure that the student body knows what the Finance Committee is doing as much as possible. I serve as chair of the Committee on Campus Life and Campus and Student Life alongside Jacob Robbins, and I think that it would be a good thing for the student body to know that student government is spending its money responsibly, and also that there is no surplus at the end of the day when it comes to our budget, our student government budget. Money works like this. First, you get your revenue, and that's from the student activity fee of $88.50 per semester, right? And we tried to increase that, but that didn't work out. So now we have to work with the money that is currently given to us. And I think that Giselle, the comptroller, had a good point earlier today when it came to discussing about how the Finance Committee goes into the budget advisory committee. When it comes to the budget allocation, the BAC, when it comes to that committee, it's important for the finance chair to represent the collective group, and its decisions when it comes to allocating money to organizations and funds. So I would work with Senator Roberts on making sure that AU student government runs on a balanced budget, and that we are not giving money to certain organizations within our student government that will not spend all of its money at the end of the day, at the end of the academic year. Because when we are giving $88.50 to student activities, I expect that, whatever the BAC allocates to student government, and how we as a finance committee allocate money to internal organizations within AUSG, I would be best qualified to run that, because all the organizations I've been involved with, including the Hawaii Club, including my high school student government and whatnot, it's just that when it comes to running a balanced budget, and also a budget that spends all of the students' money and that there is no rollover at the end of the day. There is no, thousands of dollars rolling over to the next school year, because what happens to the graduating seniors that have lost that, I guess, that money, that lost that money? I really can't see that, it's really a shame for there to be rollover money from one semester to the next, from the spring semester to the fall semester, just because the students' money the revenue minus the expenses should equal to zero. And I'm willing, as a member of the finance committee, if I were elected, to ensure that that happens. That we don't run into a deficit, that we don't have surplus money, that we spend all of the students' money, and then the students know about the money that we're spending, and then the students should feel that we as a student government support. And that's what I'm willing to do with my experience in managing my own money, managing other people's money, and managing student organizations. And I have the knowledge and experience to do that. So,
All right, thank you. Questions for the nominee? Bobby?
About the concern about rollover money, can you think of any specific instances where our organizations have not spent their budgets to a concerning degree?
yes, I mean, you made all the numbers from the last school year, right? Openly accessible to the public, and also we can see on the AUSG website about the surplus and rollover money into the student government restricted account. And I mean, of course, you're gonna have maybe a few $100 in leftovers, but when you have thousands of dollars in rollover going into restricted and then going out, that's student money that could be spent better. And when I'm looking at Giselle's presentation right now, and I've talked with her at a previous meeting about it, it looks like that several organizations will have rollover money, will have thousands of dollars of rollover money. And imagine if hypothetically, if that when we go into the budgetary committee, when we go into the BAC to allocate money to certain organizations, and Giselle apparently has $2,000 to spend on student clubs and organizations. And if student government has money that could be sent over to the club council, then that should happen. Or possibly to, show a gesture of goodwill to the students. Maybe if we're not spending all of our money, and if, let's say, AUCC, the amount of allocations that it gives out to clubs and organizations on our campus, if they're not spending all of their money and that's going back into the pool for the next school year, then that ought to be remedied, whether it be reducing the student activity fee. I think that would be an interesting solution to, I guess, when it comes to the rising cost of attending college. And also when it comes to rolling over, I mean, of course, you're gonna have, like I said earlier, a couple $100 in rollover. Of course, that's understandable. But when you have thousands of dollars in rollover money, that's student money that's wasted.
A quick follow-up. Are you aware that the thousands of dollars that are budgeted for the rest of the semester in our programming boards are for events like Take Back the Night, AmFest, and the, as of yet, unrecorded spending of Monk of the Year? That's what that money is set aside for.
But I don't doubt the ability for, KPU, and I'm sure Jordan can speak on to how KPU spends its money. I think KPU has done a great job when it comes to spending money for the student body. But at the same time, when we're looking into the future, I as a member of the, if I were to be a member of the budget committee in our student government senate, I would make sure that these organizations and AUSG are spending their money appropriately, and that members of our committee are going out to those events to see what's the student feedback, what's the student response. only spending money on the right things and the right events. So I will support my fellow members on the finance committee, and I will bring my experience of working with AU Club Council to the table. And that's something unique because I do know how AUCC works, and that speaks to my strength.
Jacob?
Curtis, how many times has the Committee on Campus and Student Life met, and what are some of the things that it's tackled? So give me 3 things.
Okay, so first, when it comes to campus and student life, I mean, as a committee, we met once this semester.
How many times did you meet last semester? I'm just asking a question.
How many times?
Yes.
I mean, I don't have that number. I mean, we haven't formally met as just like the dining committee. We didn't necessarily, meet formally, but we've been to each other's office hours. We've talked to each other. And I'm actually working on something with Dr. Ah's office, with the Office of Campus Life, on supporting students over spring break and Thanksgiving. And we'll meet this week. We'll meet this week Thursday. Let's put that on the record for the meeting. We'll meet this Thursday at 1 p.m.
Will you make sure all the other members can meet? Will you plan a doodle poll? How will you decide?
Let him finish.
And that's we already decided, through that doodle poll that throughout the semester we are available at that certain time period, and we'll get members to show up. We'll get members to show up to the committee.
Timing for questioning has elapsed. If both candidates could leave the room, we'll move to debate.
If only
I thought about that so many times, and we could definitely watch the live stream.
Discussion, Danya.
So I would like to point out that I think they're both very strong candidates. I think the question about when the campus and student life committee has met is kind of unfair, just because being a chair of a committee, I know how difficult it is to get people to meet, and mine has only met like once or twice this semester so far, and I think once last semester. But it's extremely hard to get people to meet, even if you send out doodle polls, just getting people to sign them and fill them out is very hard. So I think that was kind of not really pertaining to the actual position, but I think they're both very strong candidates. And I would like to hear further discussion about who to vote for, because I'm very undecided.
Trevor, can I respond to that since it relates specifically to something that I said?
Okay, fine.
I do find that it is important, and I'll tell you why. Because Piper's Fund Committee has met probably 5 or 6 times, and there has consistently always been a clear and concise focus and a real concerted effort on behalf of every single member, on her behalf, to involve every single member. And I understand that it's really hard. I don't want to. Curtis is determined. He knows what he's doing, and he has a great work ethic. What I would like to say is that I have run into some unique difficulties being on the Campus and Student Life Committee when it comes to scheduling and when it comes to him soliciting feedback from other people. The Finance Committee is designed specifically in a way so that you are soliciting everybody's feedback on the committee, and it is probably one of the most important committees that we have. The work that committee does when it comes to deciding who gets what is really important. Piper consistently has shown that she's willing to work with so many different groups of people that she can have an even and cool head, and she can always seek to gain as much perspective from everybody, and that's why I'm voting for her. Not even a question in my mind.
Bobby.
Yeah, I asked Piper to fill this position because I had a feeling that it would open up, and I asked her because she's demonstrated that she's very committed to fulfilling the role that she takes on, even though she has a million other things to do. She's a very busy person. She is very committed to this organization, showing up to our meetings and being an active participant. and also in the additional responsibilities that she assigned to herself, working with the RHA and student activities for the events that she puts on for the fund committee. And in addition to just doing the work of showing up, which is the most important thing when you're doing the budget, because without that, nothing else can happen. In addition to just showing up, the way that she goes about things is very, it's very good. You know, she's very good at listening, which is an important job when you're getting all this feedback from different stakeholders in the organization, designing the budget. You know, she has a good understanding of how much she knows. You know, she's gotten to learn a lot from working with the fund committee, again, with campus partners and with the university administration. But at the same time, she also doesn't pretend to know things that she doesn't. And finally, I think the last point in the paper is her temperament. You know, everyone in the budget process is going to ask for an amount of money that is not possible. You know, everyone wants more than there is. So the way that she goes about things, you know, she's not a firebrand by any stretch of the imagination, will, I think, be helpful when the finance committee is doing the hard job of taking everyone's wishes and doing the best they can to reflect them in the budget that we finally get. So those are the reasons why I asked her to fill this position, having been through the budget process before and recognizing what kind of characteristics it takes to be a helpful member of it.
Sean?
Yeah, and just with working with Piper in student rights and services, her serving as my vice chair, also working with her in the fund committee, she's very reliable. She communicates very effectively. She's very honest in that she wants to learn, even on aspects she doesn't know too much about. And I think those are very important attributes, and I think she'll be a great addition to the finance committee.
Further discussion? Seeing none. We will move to vote without objection.
One vote. Everybody vote for it.
Anybody but Bob.
Was that you?
No,
I
didn't know you.
You're out of my class.
I didn't know you, Bob.
I have a few suspects for who that was.
Somebody wrote in your name, like right now.
Yeah.
They did it to Danya too.
Yeah, they did it to me, they were like, not Danya. And I was like,
Well, they were kept on the same person. That was for two classes.
yeah, it's not the same.
So we're just both independent and popular.
I mean, I don't know, it's like, it's just one person.
The last Senate elections, someone wrote in anybody.
Come on, are you-
Literally.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that. I was like, what was this? I remember it now.
Yeah, I got it. Harambe!
Oh my god, that was, but that's like different.
It's still too soon to talk about this.
It's still too soon.
It's still too soon.
It
It's so bad.
I miss
Who doesn't know?
Y'all didn't even know who
That
Ron
kid.
was before.
Yeah, like.
You were there
oh my
before.
God.
You were there before everybody else. I knew him.
No. My roommate.
Everyone else is down.
Killing a conversation.
It is, it should, it's like a, it's a big. If you want to take begrudgingly, always agree with that.
But he was born in Brownsville.
So just.
Yeah, he's actually younger.
Well, he was.
You want
So, like,
to?
it's like, what? Yeah.
And also, I just realized I just stressed
So even if like in your translation is already.
All right, the votes are tallied, and the new member of the Special Finance Committee is Piper Newland. Okay, what is next? Any further new business for the Senate? Seeing none, moving to old business. Seeing no old business, we'll move to public comment. Any member of the public wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, moving to the good of the order. Any executives for the good of the order? Seeing no executives, moving to Senate. Any senators for the good of the order? Sean.
I would just like to thank Bobby and also the other members of the bylaws commission for their hard work and their dedication. I realized it was a real lengthy document. It took a lot to edit and process and review, so I would like to thank Bobby and all the other members of the commission for their thoroughness and their dedication to do that, and then to you and Val for actually forming the commission, allowing us that opportunity.
Mr. Bell.
Thank you to Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
For doing us a solid today. Yeah, thank you for accepting me as a proxy.
Jacob.
I wanted to say, number one, I was really appreciative that we had the strong debates that we had today. I think it's really important that we always not just sort of like shrug off our responsibility, especially when there's a bouncy pencil nearby. People can still have that pencil. The one thing I do want to say is I am very excited to be the new chair of the Finance Committee, but I also do want to say I'd be lying if I didn't say I was a little nervous. I think one of my strengths, though, is constantly relying on people for support and for help. And I'm going to be relying on not just the people in our committee, but on all of you who are campus leaders and people who are in the know to create the kind of budget that our students deserve, that people really want to see. Whether that is some kind of big precipitous change or not, who knows? But as we embark on this really important time, it's important that we're all engaged. I'm going to be relying on a lot of you all for that help and assistance. So I look forward to that.
And speaking of the order, as a parliamentarian, just a question. And the Senate for the order?
I mean, yeah, you can.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Danya.
Just wanted to say that although we are not RHA, I wanted to commend RHA for their event today because I thought it was very successful. I went to it before I came to the Senate. So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to RHA for putting that out there, and hopefully AUSG will be working with RHA for fun bubble soccer in the fall, which is also exciting. And also shout out to all the proxies. Thank you for making our meeting possible today. So yeah.
Brian.
So just an update or two. Giselle's probation ended on the 22nd. I don't know if anyone sent anybody this during the meeting, but she sent all the evidence to me by the 21st. It was sufficient, and so that whole matter is laid to bed. I'm sure we all were hoping it would. And I don't know what Layla said in the meeting, but I had some concerns, and I'm going to say this in my capacity as parliamentarian, as the initial authority on the governing documents, just as I was initially concerned a little bit about some of the things in the bylaw changes. It's passed, whatever. If you want to come talk to me about that, I'm open to do that. So that's it for me.
Piper.
I just want to say thank you, and it's scary to run when there's another person who's qualified and like mad respect to Curtis, for that. And also respect to you, Bobby, for standing up there and answering all our questions. Thank you.
Sean.
Yeah, and then a final shout out to Kate, who I really enjoyed the Walk of the Year event. So thank you for Yaz and the whole KP team for putting that on. It was really enjoyable. I love the subject and what Governor Kasich had to say.
Danya.
Big shout out also that to echo off of that. Big shout out. I thought it was a great success. I thought it was interesting to see different perspectives than we usually get at the school, and I thought that was great. I thought it went really well. Like that it was like
Bobby?
Yeah, so I will be leaving country next Sunday. And if all goes well, I will not be returning to this body as a member in the fall. So this, well, what are you gonna do? This is probably then my last regular meeting as a member. So I would encourage everyone to keep working and make up for all the people who are not here, who don't show up. But you all are the good ones, so keep it up.
Happy retirement, Bobby. He's not going anywhere, folks. He's not retiring.
Curtis?
Yeah, and then I'm.
Congrats, Piper, on your new position as a committee member on the special committee on finance. I wish you all the best. And I feel that, that Jacob, with the leadership of the new chair, that, myself as the chair of campus life and, having the chair of the special committee on finance on my committee, I think it's an incredible asset to have. And I feel that we'll work on the student budget for our USG. And also we'll meet this week. About ways we can support the students for next Thanksgiving break and the following spring break, so we don't have any last minute hopes of getting discounts in Hamilton. So I think that together as a student government, that as long as we remain proactive in creating change on this campus, that this AUSG and its undergraduate senate can do great things this year, especially with the bylaws change. So thank you to Bobby for pioneering that, and also thank you to the rest of the Senate for showing up and sticking through tonight.
Sonia?
Sorry, one more thing. I wanted to give a shout out to Bobby just because when I came to Senate, like he's been here for longer than me, obviously, but he's been here for all that I've been here for. He's been a really helpful resource. I couldn't imagine what Senate would be like without him. He's one of our hardest working members to date. So thank you, Bobby, for everything you've done. So we'll miss you a lot.
Very line of the Senate.
Happy
Let's all go bounce on the castle together.
It's finished at 4. They might still have it up, but RHA was from 1-4.
Any other senators to go to the order?
Sorry, I won't.
Okay, keep your eye out for the legislative agenda, share that, and just keep working. We'll see you, actually, good luck on Wednesday to all those that are running, and then also please show up on Wednesday in terms of senators, because you need quorum to certify the elections. I will be living vicariously through the live stream, so. All right, if there's nothing else, then we are adjourned.